Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining the new episode of the Snakeman's Lair. I'm your host Lorenzo Seneci, and before we start, as per usual, I invite you to download the Haps app and subscribe to my Haps channel so that you can be always remain up to date on updates on next upcoming episodes and next guests and such. And of course, you can also support my work with the coins that Haps graciously provides you with. Yeah, shameless promotion, I know, but you know, hard times. All right, so now let's introduce our very special guest for today. It is really a pleasure to have none other than photojournalist and conservationist Celina Chien, who I'm trying to get on video right now. Let's see if I can do that. Yeah, now it should be working. We already had some troubles for that. Okay, yes. Now we're on video. I really should get better at this. All right. So hi, Celina. Thank you so much for joining, and welcome to the Snakeman's Lair.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So I've been following your work for a while on social media and also other platforms, and I mean, I have to say that it really struck me, like, what to look at everything you have accomplished already while you are I don't even know how young, but way younger than me, and that already makes me question all of my life choices. So let's see, since I'm not even sure like where to start, honestly. So let's begin from the straight facts. So you graduated last year from Imperial College London, and so congratulations on that. Well, congratulations on graduating last year to begin with, considering what the general situation was. And now you're also doing an MSc at Imperial College London as well.
Yep.
And so, yeah, even before that, though, you had a passion for wildlife conservation and for nature. So how did that come about? Because even your background is definitely not like the common standard story.
Yeah. Yeah. So I always tell people that I was born with it, because a lot of the time you have these like origin stories, and it's oh, I had this one experience and then everything clicked, but I don't have that at all. It's not as satisfying as something like that. So yeah, I was just born with it. For as long as I can remember, for as long as my family can remember, I was just obsessed with animals. And while I was in school, I was lucky enough to have good science teachers that supported my interests, because I feel like that is so important. I know, and I have met so many people who always say, I love animals, but I had a terrible science teacher, and I was really, really bad at science at school, so I never pursued it. Yeah, so I always knew that I wanted to do something with wildlife. And as soon as I was old enough to realize everything that was going wrong, all the destruction that we're kind of inflicting on the planet, I naturally went down the conservation path. And initially I wanted to stick in academia. I thought that I was going to be a biologist, a conservation biologist, full-time, do a master's, PhD, postdoc, everything. But before I even started university, I found wildlife photography and photojournalism as a method for communicating the same issue. And I fell in love with that. But I'm still a total nerd at heart, so I still, absolutely love and enjoy my scientific degrees. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that last part is definitely relatable. But yeah, speaking of academia, like, because I mean, I have to say, like, most of the people I have been interviewing so far are indeed academics to a very varying extent. But then, like, one thing that I'm definitely glad you mentioned is that academia is not the only way to have an impact for when it comes to protecting our planet, and perhaps it might not even be the best way in certain circumstances. So how did you make that choice, so to shift from the purely academic perspective to the realm of photography and journalism?
Well, it's a constant equilibrium, I would say, is because initially I didn't actually know very much about the scientific method and scientific research when I applied for my undergraduate degree, and I think most people don't. Most young people, the idea of what science and the scientific method looks like when you're in school is not at all kind of what it turns out to be later on. And so I kind of went into biology on an assumption. I didn't really know what I was getting into. I just knew that I loved the subject and I was ready to dedicate all my time to reading about it. But then I realized I took a year out between finishing school and starting university, and I kind of took the opportunity to work in conservation from every angle possible, just to figure out where I felt I was needed and where I felt I could bring something and contribute the most. And so I worked as a research assistant for a while. I worked in campaigning. I worked with environmental lawyers. I worked with animal welfare and wildlife veterinarians. I mean, really every perspective you can try to approach wildlife conservation. And it was really only by chance that I found and met some wildlife photographers. And even then, wildlife photography wasn't enough for me. I was like, okay, yeah, sure, we can take beautiful pictures, but what are we going to do with them? And so it was a slow journey to finding what I now call, environmental photojournalism. It's more storytelling based. And I went into my university degree with quite a lot of, I guess, solid opinions and quite a lot of conviction in my opinions from my experiences in practical conservation and campaigning and listening to the media and reading science communication. And then what I loved about my degree was how it completely changed the way I think about a lot of things. And what I love about science is that you always have to consider the nuance and the complexity, which I feel is really lacking in the media and communication world, because that world is very this is the solution, everything's in a binary, this is wrong, this is right, this is good, this is bad. Whereas in science, it's kind of actually, it's a bit more complicated than that. So I'm constantly, figuring out, and I know I'm going into photojournalism, but one of the reasons why I stayed in academia for a master's degree, and I'm not doing an MSc, I'm doing an MRes, so it's an entirely research-based degree. No, but that's the research is exciting and it's fun, but it helps you enormously understand how we know all this information about the natural world, and ultimately that's how we can best communicate that information and inspire people to change.
So yeah, you mentioned the lack of nuance in common mainstream representations of, basically I dare to say nearly everything that is related to the conservation universe, so to say.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean in the sense, since you're a photographer, I think, at least this is just my impression, when it comes to pictures, this is especially rampant, perhaps because it takes nothing to just publish a picture somewhere and take it completely out of context and use it to carry a message that has nothing to do with what was actually happening. So when you are on the ground, taking those pictures that, by the way, for your audience, have featured in prominent magazines and covers and such. So we're talking serious business here. So when you take your photographs, so how do you decide what to photograph first of all, and how to do it, and also where to what message you wanted to vehiculate?
Yeah, that's a great question. And with the photographs, it's all oriented around a story. So I approach everything as it's what story do I want to tell? And, this applies with biology as well. And quite often I just like calling myself a storyteller because you can either tell stories with data or you can tell stories with photographs or with words or music. But with photography, it's all oriented around a central story, and you're not just taking a photo for a moment. You're telling an entire narrative. And so quite often with my photos, I try to keep them in the context of like a photo series or essay story rather than individual shots. But one of the things that I find most important to do, sorry, it's my cat. But one of the things that I find most important to do is to be very aware of the social context of a lot of these environmental issues and how historically the photography and photojournalism community has been dominated by, well, yeah, it's almost a very like neo-colonialist view and practice of older white men from the Western world going into, the global South or all these countries with really rich biodiversity, and kind of pointing their fingers and looking, look at what they're doing to their environment, look at how they're destroying, without much consideration of how the Western world has led the way in environmental destruction since the Industrial Revolution. And so I try to, I take an intersectional approach, and especially when I'm looking at environmental issues in the global South, I try not to take photographs where there are people included that vilifies those people, especially when they're people of color. Because I think that's like we really have to approach all of these issues with empathy first and foremost for the wildlife and for the ecosystems, but also for the people who are in completely different social contexts to us. We could the age-old conversation around poachers, for example. Every time anybody posts a photograph, a Nat Geo photographer posts a photograph about elephant or rhino poaching, the first response almost always is lots of people being like, oh my God, these poachers are evil people. How could they do that? They're so horrible. They should all go to jail, blah, blah, blah. When in fact, these poachers are being, they have little to no money. They're trying to put food on the table quite a lot of the time. They're actually kind of exploited by those middlemen that are facilitating the whole trade and smuggling, and they face the brunt of the public criticism. And quite often this is allowed through the imagery that we use to tell that story. So there's a lot to consider when you're taking a photograph to introduce nuance. But the most important thing is, for me, a good photograph doesn't give you an answer. It makes you ask a question. So rather than having a photograph that provides a very easy villain or good or bad, it's a photograph that makes you question your understanding of the world.
Well, yeah, that is definitely something that we all should remember, especially when again we scroll through Instagram and see a ton of like photos of picturesque photos of wildlife or like baby animals and stuff, because there's a lot behind it that the photo in itself doesn't show, or at least there should be a lot behind it that the photo in itself doesn't show it, if I understand correctly what you just said. And perhaps actually, if I can rephrase, one of the problems is exactly that this is not always the case. But it was, since you were talking about the social context of conservation and of the settings that you work in. I was also wondering, because this kind of the work that you do, like a photojournalism work, not forces but brings you in contact with situations that are definitely uncomfortable, emotionally, if not bordering dangerous even. So like and this is something that also that isn't really discussed much, like the from a health wise perspective, what does it entail to work in a field like conservation, where you're confronted with doom and gloom basically left, right, and center. So like how did that shape you as a person? Well, shape maybe is not the right word, but what impact did it have on you to like be confronted with these realities, like face to face, and confronting them heads on and documenting them for the general public to see? Because this is emotionally and perhaps even like safety wise.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really great question, and I'm really glad you brought it up because, like you said, people aren't talking about it enough. And I think there's a serious crisis of burnout and mental health in the conservation world. But yeah, it's really difficult. Some of my most memorable experiences of having to deal with this, yes, it's discomfort, but also a deep grief and pain, really, is, seeing rainforests being burned down, or I've done a lot of work documenting the illegal wildlife trade, and particularly of live animals for the pet trade. And that is extremely difficult to walk away from because, you're there, you're taking photographs of animals in captivity, and then you leave and you go and you live your life or whatnot. And sometimes I can't help but think, while I'm sitting here in this apartment in London, well, that orangutan that I photographed in a really horrible zoo situation, he's still there and he's still suffering, and he will continue to suffer for the rest of his life, unless something can be done. And it's the same with these bigger issues of, deforestation and bigger ecological problems. Yeah, it's really hard to actually just walk away from it and try to live your own life. But I think it's important that people talk about it, and people talk about how difficult it is and how painful it is, because I see it as this form of grief. When we see something destroyed, it is a form of loss, and should be treated as loss and as grief. And so many people think that human beings can watch all of this destruction without being fazed by it at all, and it's so not true. The whole idea of eco-anxiety, we all see it online. People always, one of the biggest responses I get is like, oh my gosh, but it's just really exhausting having to look at this all the time. It's like, yes, imagine trying to experience that. But in the end, the journalists and the scientists, at least from the Western world, aren't the ones that have to really bear the brunt of it all. It's the people who live on the ground in those communities, on the front lines of these disasters, that have to, it's part of their daily life and their existence. So the least we can do is try to fight for it and represent them in what ways we can. So it's about balancing the good and the bad, and about trying to find motivation, and surrounding yourself with good people that you can go to when things get really, really tough.
And you mentioned indeed the fact that that ultimately you live in London at the moment, and you were talking about how it is how hard it is to basically like get into the context of, like, your example was illegal wildlife trade, like seeing an orangutan in excruciating pain in a cage, and then just flying away and going back home. And so I was wondering, like, what does it take to basically like get into such a setting, such a scenario? So like leaving your life in in London, in like a mega city, and then get into a context where like you are surrounded by a completely different reality, and then going back to the Western context, and then this constant back and forth that has basically marked your life so far. So how does that work? So how can you do you switch between these? Is there some mechanism that you in your mind that there's a play that you switch, that sometimes switches between one world and the other? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, isn't it? But no, it's you're absolutely right. This like switching, this back and forth, and you do have to put yourself in a certain mindset. And I find myself quite often, you know, when I'm in London, I'm like, oh, I wish I could be in the field. And then when I'm in the field, I'm like, oh, this is actually quite horrible. I don't know if other people have that, but I mean, of course, it depends where you are. And so, yeah, quite often when I have these difficult topics to cover, I make sure that I also spend some time out in nature. So, for example, if I'm photographing orangutans in captivity, then, you know, to get the full story, I need orangutans in the wild as well. And so I'll do that. And that is incredibly restorative and beautiful and wonderful and motivating. You know, seeing orangutans in the wild, it's okay, this is why I'm doing this. Look at how beautiful it is here. Look at how happy it makes me just to stand in this rainforest and hear the cicadas and the birds. And that makes it all worth it. And then coming back to the city, it takes me some time to adjust. I mean, you can ask any of my friends. For the first week or two, I'm always a bit like slightly, I'm not going to say depressed because that reduces the experience of actually depressed people, but yeah, just quite upset when I first come back. But it's all about finding ways, you know, just knowing that, okay, but in the end, I'm doing what I can, and I'm going to use these photos for something good, and I'm going to use these photos to try to help those situations. So yeah, but it is really hard, like mentally, in terms of mental health, and it's all about having the right people around you.
And yeah, again, speaking of mental health, and also of age as well. Again, like I remember I read an interview that you gave recently about the impact, that where you were discussing the impact of last year's, well, of the ongoing pandemic on the not only mental health but also future perspectives of young people, of youth that basically found themselves stuck in the middle of a process that society always demands to be as fast as possible.
Yeah.
So in that sense, since you are also exceptionally young, for at least for the common image of what a conservationist or a wildlife photographer looks like, because you said it yourself, usually we picture like maybe not old, but definitely older white men, and then here you come with basically smashing that with a sledgehammer. So, like, I mean, just to put things in context, you gave us a TEDx talk at 17, and then your pictures again are getting published everywhere at not even 25. So how did you get there? Maybe not so fast, because that's not the right term. Like, so like at such an early point in your life, because usually like the young people are still looked down upon and patronized as if you don't have the experience to do this yet. So how did you confront this dynamic and challenge it so successfully, I would say?
Well, I think we all have to really rethink how we view our youth. Um, the young people all around us. I mean, Greta Thunberg is just one very incredible testament to how strong young people can be and how empowered, and just with a little bit of empowerment, how much change young people can instill in the world, because ultimately we are the ones who inherit the earth. um, and especially for these kind of issues, I think, especially with nature and wildlife, young people, if you just go to any child, I don't think there's a single child on the planet that will not share delight in marveling at the natural world. And it's only once you get older where people are like, nature, I'm kind of bored or not super interested. You know what I mean? And even then
Yeah.
it's quite rare. Like I think every single human being deep down has some sort of intrinsic love for the natural world. And if you just show them something cool enough or beautiful enough or whatnot, then they'll fall in love with it. But if you do that with children, it's so easy. They're any frog, caterpillar, snake, they love. So I think it's really important to not neglect the young people of the world and not dismiss their opinions or what they're capable of, because quite often, it'll come from the heart, even if it's not, even if, some people can perceive it as naive. I mean, what's wrong with that? It's optimistic. It's ambitious. It's and in the end, it's ultimately extremely ambitious, and that's what we need, because right now, when you start factoring in all the other variables, we kind of hold back on our goals and commitments and ambitions on a legislative level. But what we need is the ambition and positivity and optimism of young people to actually get to where we need to be. But yes, how did I do it? Well, in a nutshell, I was just lucky enough to know exactly what I wanted to do from a very early age. And I'm enormously privileged enough to have pursued that from such an early age, having parents that were financially supportive of my goals, because there are plenty of people who don't have that privilege or opportunity, or even the support of their parents to begin with in certain contexts. So I think I did my first ever wildlife volunteering activity when I was 14 years old. And then I guess it comes from a place of, I wasn't very popular in school, didn't have many friends, so I was just retreated to the natural world. I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna go hang out in nature. And and so all of my holidays, everything, I tried to just do something that I enjoyed, which happened to be conservation related. And I wasn't even thinking at the time, like, oh, I can put this on my CV. But in the end, I could put it on my CV. Um, so yeah, and I think it's just I'm just really lucky and privileged to have been able to pursue that from an early age. And there are so many people, especially financially in the conservation world, so much of the work you start off doing is voluntary and unpaid. It's unpaid internships. And then also, especially in academia, I mean, tuition fees are enormous, depending on what country you're in. But, undergraduate tuition fees and masters and getting funding for a PhD and postdoc, it's really, yeah, it's draining and it's difficult. And so some people are lucky enough to take those, volunteering or unpaid internship opportunities, which is extremely disadvantageous for people who don't have that privilege. And so, yeah, it's tough. But in terms of from the young age, I think it just happened naturally, and I wasn't very conscious of that I was, doing things for my career. I was just doing things that I wanted to do at the time. or I have this inability to let things, if I see something happening that I find unjust, I will step in or I will say something. And I think some people are like, oh my gosh, Celina, just let it slide this one time. And I'm like, no. So that in part is also to blame for how it all started very early on.
Well, I'm not sure if blame is the word that I use in that sense. And again, how dare I say that, since I'm not even a native English speaker, but still like that. But I mean,
it's also,
and also
like all. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, yeah. Just like I was wondering, since you hear a lot of stories, even from people that I have interviewed, and also others that I know who are making a great impact and are having amazing careers. It often happens that they were the unpopular kid in high school, which kind of makes you wonder, how the hell does high school function? Like,
absolutely. I mean, I have a funny joke. It's like the people who loved high school and really thrived, either they went to like some new age school where everyone got along, or or it's like the people who really struggled socially and all that in high school, that then when they finish, they have the opportunity to pursue what they love without, the judgment and criticism of the social pressures around them. And then they blossom afterwards. So, you've got like the people who thrive after they're released from trivial social pressures of a contained adolescent environment.
So yeah, bottom line, guys, is if you were the unpopular person in high school, well, that's apparently not a bad way to start. So
I think it also just kind of shows that, if you were different at that age, you were willing to stand up. Like you didn't really want to change and conform, and you stuck to your differences. I remember I faltered when I was at a certain age. I loved the outdoors and all that, but then there was a certain age where I was like trying to suppress all of that to fit in, and I was like, actually no, this just doesn't work.
Thank God you didn't. So yeah, you mentioned, once again, you said that you can't possibly let anything slide that you find unjust. And on that front, like even in terms of the work that you're doing, that shows a lot, because, for instance, just to start with an example, you are a member of an organization, Girls Who Click, who again is working to encourage girls and women to enter the field of photography, which once again, because it's never stressed enough, it was historically dominated, like ruled by a male-dominated perspective. So what's your role in the organization, and what objective does Girls Who Click pursue its main goal?
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning it. So Girls Who Click is an NGO, nonprofit that was started by Susie Esterhaus. She is a phenomenal wildlife photographer. But yeah, it's basically trying to provide free workshops for young girls who want to go into nature photography, workshops, master classes, and such, and also providing representation in a way. There wasn't really previously to them, there wasn't really an acknowledgement of how male-dominated nature photography is. And so it's really helpful to be able to have that organization, to see all the partner photographers who are established professional women nature photographers in their fields, and just kind of have that as a platform to have as representation, but also to see, it is possible. And then, of course, those photographers provide free masterclasses and workshops and whatnot for young girls who want to get into this field. And then they also have this amazing thing called the ambassador program. So I'm an ambassador for Girls Who Click, and I'm also on the an advisory board member. But the ambassador program specifically targets young women, so women between the ages of, I think, 18 and 30. And ambassadors are assigned a mentor, so they have a mentorship with a professional photographer, which is so valuable in the world of photography and photojournalism, because mentors are absolutely, I think, vital, because how else are you supposed to learn the ins and outs of an industry? But and also, the basic, there is one, to my knowledge, university degree about natural history photography, but otherwise it's really, you kind of have to figure it out on your own and learn from others. So mentorship is invaluable, and having that mentorship who's also a woman who understands the challenges that you're facing in the industry but also out in the world is super helpful. And it's just one big, wonderful community of women who support each other, which is so important with all of these issues, because I stand up for a lot of, I guess, gender-related issues, because not only is the empowerment of women and girls all over the globe one of the most powerful solutions to the climate and ecological crisis, but it's also something that, I actively have to face, sexism and misogyny in the industries that I work with. I'm sure many of your audience members, because of your previous guests on this, have probably been in academia. I'm sure they're well aware that there are few women in STEM subjects or in the sciences. So it's not just in photography. So, and one of the most important things, I think, is in combating that is supporting each other and collaborating. And, when one of us breaks that ceiling or opens a new door, it's leaving that open for the next person behind us. Yeah.
Just 1 second. I'm going to charge my laptop because it's about to die. I should have done it. I should have done it in advance, but thank God I realized at least. Okay.
Yes, no worries.
I'll be back in a sec. All right, here we go. Okay, so and then my next question was going to be about not the other side of the social justice aspects that you are championing, but because they are of course heavily interconnected, but still another thing, because I know that you also participated you've been very vocal about the issue of racial justice in conservation as well. You were a panelist in a recent discussion on diversity and racial dynamics in the natural world. I think it was last year, if I remember correctly. Just to I really wanted to ask you this, because I think the moment I realized that the situation was bad, at least in the natural science field, was when I attended a WWF workshop / conference in the Netherlands 3 years ago as part of a course that I was taking at university. And at some point, this guy, this WWF guy who was doing the presentation, who was delivering the presentation, he basically, he was talking about illegal wildlife trade and poaching and such. And of course, China came up because of the issue of shark fin trade and rhino horn and all that. And then at some point he said, and I quote, this is basically a quote, mind you. He said, "Well, Asian people don't care about conservation." I remember the faces in the audience in my class, and were like, some of whom were Asian, of course. It was like, I'm forcing myself not to curse on my broadcast, but sometimes it's not easy. So yeah, you can imagine. And so I was I was thinking, so in your experience, but also in the experience of people you have been working with and you have been in contact with, like how prevalent this mindset, especially against Asian people, since again China is considered the root of all evil often when it comes to conservation, and you as a Eurasian have been very vocal about that as well.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, it's very widespread sentiment, and one of the reasons why I wanted to go and was driven into going into the media side of conservation was because of this lack, this lack of diversity, women, but also people of color in the world of communicating science, communicating environmental issues. And I found that, all of these issues, because a lot of them do somehow find their way back to China, or at least East and Southeast Asia, whether it's the wildlife trade or whether it's consumption or pollution or emissions or, all this stuff that China has been associated with, and, factually is correct. I find that most of the dialogue around that is driven by white people in the West, without granting much empathy or consideration or context to people who live, to East and Southeast Asian people. And I found that a lot of, especially with wildlife trade stuff, it's very finger pointing, very condescending, very patronizing, very critical. And so I thought, I really need to correct this because there is no future where we will find a solution to these environmental issues by being at odds with each other or by criticizing one group with no empathy and consideration of, cultural differences or traditions, or even the West's role in causing these countries to be emitting or producing or whatnot. Like China, yes, has the largest emissions of greenhouse gases in the world, I think. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure. But why is that? It's because they're manufacturing for the rest of the world, mostly for the global north. So it's about looking introspectively and understanding that it's all connected, but also having another perspective on these countries and all these cultures. And yes, and especially in environmentalism and conservation, that sentiment of, Asian people don't care about conservation or the environment, it's everywhere. And it's because, the imagery and the dialogue has been vilifying. And also now with COVID, anti-Asian hate has skyrocketed across the globe, especially in cities where there is a large, East and Southeast Asian diaspora. And so, yeah, it's something that I care about deeply because there are people suffering and dying because of it. And because there's, we're not going to fix any of these problems without fixing that issue first. And also, I have to put up with a lot of it in my day-to-day.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, so it's a big, all-encompassing issue, and it's not just towards Asians. It's all people of color everywhere. It's Indigenous people, and yeah, it's one of the most important issues of humanity today, I feel. So yeah.
No, for sure. And I mean, yeah, no, my question was focused on Asian hate because, yeah, indeed, the China monster, the narrative that we hear a lot when it comes to environmentalism is really something that I definitely had the impression that it was spiraling out of control, and apparently it's even worse than I thought. So
yes, yeah, and I think because So to give everyone context, I call myself Eurasian, so European Asian. I'm mixed race. I grew up in both China and in Europe, in Italy, actually.
Really?
Yeah, my family are based in Milano, but I
Oh,
don't
well,
speak Italian.
definitely quite close to there.
Yeah, but it's so I kind of live between many countries because I'm not from Italy. I'm Dutch, I'm Canadian, and blah, like all over the place. But yeah, I have Chinese heritage. And so I find it really difficult balancing, and this is less environmental related, but it's still something that's quite interesting. It's like balancing the actions of the Chinese government with being able to stand up for myself and my, race and heritage, because annoyingly, a lot of people see all East and Southeast Asian people as like this one monolith of China, which is wrong. And also an obstacle to progress. But at the same time, China has been able to do a lot for the environment in terms of financial investment and the speed at which they can accomplish a lot of things and the speed at which they can introduce new legislation. So China is a really incredible opportunity for massive environmental change, because not only are a lot of the, can we trace a lot of the issues back to China, but the fact that China is able to create change so rapidly, that's also really, really important.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a perspective that I myself didn't consider, because like, yeah, if I understand correctly, you're saying that if China really has the power to impact the environment, the environment so badly, at least according to the so badly according to the general narrative, and also with emissions and wildlife trade and such, then that power could also be redirected to repair what has been done. Basically, what something like what has happened, or what is happening, arguably not to a sufficient extent, but still in the West, where in the time of the Industrial Revolution, it was here in Europe and in the United States and also in Latin America, that every single shred of natural world was being destroyed, and then now we're trying to get it back.
Yeah.
To get it back together, at least officially.
Yeah.
So hopefully, at least it's heartening to hear that. Hopefully that could happen in China and in East Asia as well. So. And so thank you so much, Celina, for being here today. I see that once again there are no questions from the audience like last time. Like, people, like, what's up? Seriously, like like we're having great guests, and trust me, they know a lot, and they can, and beyond knowledge, like they have a lot to share. So you're definitely missing out. Let me tell you, like, I can't force anyone to speak up, but I mean, I get it. I was the totally introvert guy, the guy too at school, but still, well, your choice. What can I say? And again, so thank you so much, Celina. It was a real pleasure, and once again, another extremely insightful and instructive interview. So all the best for your masters and your work. And for everyone in the audience, make sure to download the app and stay and follow my updates, because I will share the next interview date, time, and the name of our next guest soon enough. So stay tuned for that, and we will be back soon with another episode of the Snakeman's Lair. So in the meantime, everyone have a great week, and see you soon.